I purposely made Lily a character who was really in that coming of age
Mhm.
moment in her life where she's trying to figure out who she is. Esty is by far the bigger, bolder, more defiant, sort of stronger in personality of the two.
Mhm.
And so when Lily has to set off on her own, she has to ask herself, not only how do I keep this boy safe, but how do I channel that courage that Esty has to be a mom to this child, to protect him.
Welcome to our latest episode of Book Reporter Talks to. Our guest today is Georgia Hunter, and we are going to be talking about her book, her new book, One Good Thing. Now, most of you know Georgia's name. Yes, you do. I know you do. From her New York Times bestseller, We Were the Lucky Ones, which was also adapted to a brilliant series on Hulu, and we'll touch on that later on. Now, let's get to the praise for One Good Thing. And let me go with some authors whose names I think you know that are going to be praising this book. Let's start with Chris Whitaker, the author of All the Colors of the Dark, who says, One Good Thing is a story of unbreakable friendship, of remarkable resilience, of how love and hope can shine through even in the darkest, most unimaginable horrors. And he calls it stunning. And Lauren Fox, the author of Send for Me, said, This novel is a fascinating glimpse into a piece of World War II history I knew very little about, and a truly moving portrait of what it means to be brave. Lily's journey is thrilling and intimate. I made myself read slowly, and I agree with her on that, in order to savor it. It entered my dreams. I did not want this beautiful book to end. And that's something really fabulous to say. And with that intro, welcome, Georgia. It's just lovely to meet you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on, Carol. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Let's start with you sharing an overview of One Good Thing. I don't want to attempt to do it because I think
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just such a brilliant story of the way you're looking at the war and the time of war and friendship. Really, really interesting. So you're
Thank
on.
you. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, yeah. So one good thing was a pretty big departure for me from it's my second book, and We Were the Lucky Ones was based entirely on my family story, as you know. So I was lucky in a sense that the plot was there for me for my first novel, that my first stab in this world of being an author. And I did everything in my power to do that story justice and to tell it with as much truth and authenticity as possible. But I sure wasn't going to veer from that storyline. Um, this book, I had the creative license to decide, where to set it and who my main characters would be and what would happen to them. And so I thought long and hard before I kind of settled on a theme and the topic and the setting because as an author, you live with your work in your heart
Yes.
and in your mind for a very long time before, during, and after publication. We Were the Lucky Ones was a 9-year process for me, the book, and then another 4 years to make the series. So it's been just a part of my life and forever will be. I think about it all the time. Like I think my DNA was changed and discovered in the writing of that book, and then in the aftermath of it as well. It's like now that's forever a part of me. So I don't take writing, I didn't take choosing the next one lightly at all. And I decided to set this one in Italy for a couple of reasons. First, I feel like despite the fact that the country is home to one of the oldest Jewish populations, its Holocaust history, to me at least, felt relatively unknown. I
Mhm.
hadn't read a lot of books on set in Italy, World War II, or seen a lot of films. I didn't remember learning much about it in school,
Mhm.
as opposed to the story of Poland and Germany and Eastern Europe. My family was Polish, so I obviously did a lot of research into that and remembered learning a bit about it. So I thought um, it could be interesting to tell the story of Italy's Holocaust through the eyes of a young woman and through this story, like you said, of friendship and motherhood and survival. Um, and then we can talk about my reasons to set it in Italy in a little bit if you want. But in a nutshell, the story follows a young woman named Lily who you meet in university. She's sort of at that age where she's figuring out what she wants to do in her life, what kind of job she wants to take. She wants to start a family. She has a best friend, Esty, who's a couple of years older. Esty's Greek, and the book opens actually with the birth of Esty's young son,
Mhm.
Theo. So these two are best friends, and the book opens in 1940, and the war hasn't yet come to Italy. And despite the fact that there are racial laws that Mussolini has instilled that are slowly but surely chipping away at their most basic of rights, and which have declared the Jews of Italy of an inferior race.
Hmm.
And despite the fact that Mussolini also controlled the media, so the headlines are growing more and more anti-Semitic, the propaganda is rampant, life somehow goes on
Hmm.
for Lily and Esty and for the Jews of Italy who are very assimilated and don't think of themselves as Jewish or Italian, but both. Despite the fact that their world is like slowly closing in on them.
Hmm.
Again, very different from what was happening in Eastern Europe, where from
Hmm.
one day to the next, if you were Jewish, and for example, my family living in Poland, the country fell within a week of the start of the war, and all of a sudden your life was at stake.
Hmm.
So that wasn't so much the case in Italy. It was much more of a slow build. But all of that changed in 1943 when Germany did invade Italy. And
Hmm.
the friends, Lily and Esty, find themselves in Nazi occupied territory. And without giving too much away, they sort of set off in motion. They decide to leave Ferrara, this little town in the north where they were studying at university, and they start to move around a bit. And eventually disaster strikes in Florence,
Hmm.
and Lily is tasked. Esty asks her to sort of do the unfathomable, which is to leave without her, to go on the run with her young son, Theo, in tow. Theo is then 2 years old. So the book follows Lily. You get to know the friendship between Lily and Esty, but then the book really follows Lily and Theo as they set off, heading south toward what they hope is Allied territory, towards safety, and Lily being forced to make decision after decision about where to go, who to trust, whose door
Hmm.
to knock on, whether to trust the church or not trust the church to help. All these decisions she's making along the way on this mission to not just stay alive, but to keep her best friend's young son safe. So it's a story of, like, again, of friendship. I loved writing the story of Lily and Esty and how they met and how so different they were, but how close they were. And of motherhood, Lily becomes the surrogate mother to Theo, of survival. And I think at its core, it's a story of love. It's the love between friends, between a mother and child. There's a romance along the way between Lily and a young soldier. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. I'm going to try not to give away too many spoilers. I know we're going to be chatting for a little bit today, but I'll try not to give too many
Me
spoilers
too.
away.
I'm sitting there like, no, 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 don't talk about that. No, no, no,
Yeah.
don't go in that
You
direction.
can always stop me if you think I am.
And stop me too, if you think that I am as
Okay.
well. One of the reasons you picked Italy was because your parents had met there. They'd spent time there. I mean, let's put it this way, when you find the place you fell in love, you want to bring your children back there to visit.
Yeah.
So that seemed like a perfect place besides other reasons for having it there. So you spent time there as a child as
I
well as an adult?
I did. That was a huge part of choosing Italy. Yeah, my parents were both American when they were living in Rome, in the expat community. My mom was running a clothing shop. She was importing these incredibly cool pieces of clothing from Turkey and all over. And
Mhm.
my father was in the arts, so he was writing and directing and acting in spaghetti westerns, a whole bunch of spaghetti westerns at the time. So when they met, they fell in love, and they ended up staying for a combined 17 years of how long they were each there. And they just loved it. In the summers, they would go down to this little beach town called Sperlonga, sort of closer to Naples, where they ended up deciding to run a restaurant. My mom knew nothing about running a restaurant or cooking. She said she went out and bought the joy of cooking, and she and a dear friend and my dad just started serving
Whatever she cooked.
Italians. She cooked the most basic and simplest of meals, which then I was lucky enough to grow up on. So yeah, so when I was a kid, I grew up hearing stories about life in Rome and in Sperlonga, and like the people and the culture and the food and the scenery. And I knew it was the place that they had met. They took me on my first trip when I was a toddler. Um, I have pictures of me with my dad at the Trevi Fountain, and then the same exact picture like 10 years later, and another 5 years later. I just like a place I keep going back and back. I spent my semester abroad there in college. I went for my research for One Good we were the lucky ones. I've been on many vacations, and I have a bucket list. Like I want to see the world and travel
Mhm.
and explore, but Italy is the place I keep going back and back to. So it holds a special place in my heart, and it was sort of a no-brainer to between that and the fact that I felt like there was an opportunity to tell the story of the Holocaust, these untold stories. Even though my main characters are made up, all the people and places that they come into contact with are rooted deeply in history. So between those two things, it was an easy choice for me to set it there.
My background on both sides is Italian, which is really
I
funny.
know,
Like I'm a
Sue.
Fitzgerald only by marriage. So,
Okay. What was your maiden name?
Sassetti. Sassetti, and my mother's
Okay.
was Wicioci. And
Okay.
my mother's family, except for my grandfather, still live in the same village in Italy. And my mother went over to visit, and they all have done well. I don't exactly know because you sort of like the translation with my mom. I'm like, okay, well, what were they doing? It
Yeah.
was something with a lumber business or
Okay.
woodworking or something. And they also have apartments in Rome. And they've invited us over. My mom sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but we want to
Sorry.
go as a family and go
Yes.
to this
You
town, which I am
should.
not remembering the name of, and I texted to my husband and son because they remember these things better. I think it might
Yeah.
be Bruges, but I'm not sure. But I want to go and just see. And I've always said to my mother, "Why did Grandpa leave? Like, why did he's the
Yeah.
only one who came to America? It's not like he
Yeah.
had to leave. It's not. I'm dying to go get that family story, and then the stories about survival. I remembered my cousin gave a eulogy for one of my uncles when he passed away. It was these crazy things like he'd gotten out of school, he left school at eighth grade to go help the family, earn
Hmm.
money. He was living here in the
Hmm.
States.
Hmm.
Then he went to war, never went to high school, came back, went to college, and in college, after college, worked for the American Cancer Society and was a major job, like, for public relations and everything for this. And you're sitting there thinking that it was such a different time. You could skip 4 years of school and still get ahead in life. And he, at the time, I've got the story from my cousin just about a half hour ago, reminded me the cousin Anna was hiding up in the hills of outside Rome, and he was bringing her food and supplies. Now she was Catholic, that to our like record, but it was the bombing that was going on in the town,
Hmm.
and they left. So even though they weren't Jewish, how it affected their world, and he was bringing them food and supplies. And I never heard this story until his
Hmm.
funeral when it was part of the eulogy. And I called my cousin a little while ago just to get clarification. So there are all these things that happen along the way. And one of the things that was interesting is how many churches they went to along the way to find
Hmm.
safety. And did you find that interesting, or is that something you
Oh,
knew
yeah.
going in?
No, no. I mean, of course, like it's home to the Vatican and the Pope, and um, I was so fascinated in my research to learn about the role of the church, which interestingly is still widely debated today.
Mm,
The church and of the Italian people. So I think, like all sides of history, there were the people who helped, and there were the huge there were many, many members of the church who did help and open their doors, and then there were some who didn't.
mhm.
There's debate today about the role of the Pope. I mean, his records were just released in 2020. I don't know if you know, and
Wow, I don't know
there
that.
have been
Wow.
books written about them, and there's again still so much discussion today. Could he have said more? Did he do enough? So I found that very fascinating because you naturally think, well, the church is a place that will be safe, I'll be protected, and Lily experiences that, but she experiences both sides of this, where there are people who are willing to put their lives at risk because it's not just the Germans, the Nazis who are the danger. There are plenty of black shirt fascists, officers working under Mussolini, who was in power, then out of power, then reinstated into power. So it was all very confusing and murky, which was another one of my big takeaways in my research. Like the Italian history was confusing. There were so many twists and turns. And for me to try to make sense of it is one thing, but for my characters to be living it day to day, I had to kind of give myself the permission to say, okay, you know what? It was confusing for them too. Actually,
Mhm.
probably way more so, right? They didn't have perspective. They
No.
didn't have, and many of them weren't even allowed radios, and the headlines were controlled by Mussolini. So what did you know? What was the truth? And so trying to sort that all out took me a good deal of time. And then I allowed myself the license to have Lily, my main character, experience some of that murkiness and some of that confusion.
Hmm.
And when it came to the church, yes, that's often the first place she thought to seek refuge. And I did try to kind of tell both sides of the story without picking a side or without saying one is right or wrong necessarily, but just kind of telling it as it was, as I read, many, many accounts of what people were experiencing at the time, so that readers could kind of appreciate the more kind of global story of what was happening in Italy at the time.
Yeah, and there were the motherless children that they were trying to smuggle to Switzerland in the middle of the
Yes.
night. And can you do this? And do you have time to get there? And just every single step of the way, you walk up to somebody on the street, somebody would see you walking, and you'd wonder, should I have hidden? Should I have gone? You can't walk in the dark with a young child. You can't do
Yeah,
this.
there are curfews. You're not even allowed to be out after dark. And you're right, the bombs were also a huge risk. So not only if you were Jewish, were you at risk of getting stopped by a fascist or a Nazi, at a checkpoint, but the Allies were constantly flying over the center and the north of Italy and dropping bombs to try to sever German supply routes or just destroy cities. And so you're, being attacked from above. You didn't know who on the ground was safe. So it was constant peril. And these, yeah, I've just tried to put myself in Lily's shoes and say, what would that have felt like? How would I have managed? How would I have kept going and made those decisions? And, I purposely made Lily a character who was really in that coming of age
Mhm,
moment in her life where she's trying to figure out who she is. Esty is by far the bigger, bolder, more defiant, sort of stronger in personality of the two.
mhm.
And so when Lily has to set off on her own, she has to ask herself, not only how do I keep this boy safe, but how do I channel that courage that Esty has to be a mom to this child, to protect him? Because I just feel like, I don't know, I personally am so drawn to these stories of, I think World War II especially and the Holocaust, where the people experiencing it were such ordinary people.
Yes.
They were just like us. They weren't necessarily, war heroes or, prominent people. They were just people trying to live their lives.
Right.
And I really am fascinated by those ordinary people who are just thrust almost overnight into the most extraordinary of circumstances. And how do you deal with that? How do you react to that? How do you keep going
What
in
do you
that
do?
world?
And you always think, when I'm reading these books, I'm like, if I was Lily, what would I have done? If I was Esty, would I have been that brave? What skills do I have that I could have helped?
Yeah.
And would I have had the courage to take those skills and do what was needed? And it was
Yeah.
all those moments. And I find myself, especially when I read books about this war, World War II, constantly thinking about in my neighborhood, who would I trust? Like, who would be the
Mhm.
person that would turn somebody in? And it sounds terrible. I'm living in the suburbs
I
in
know.
New Jersey, but this feeling of who could you really trust? Who could you throw and say, like they're going to help take care of us or whatever? And
Right.
you're really trying to figure out who's going to be every man for themselves. The neighbors are going to be gone in the middle of the night. I mean, the stories really, to me, make me sit and think about, and we have such comfortable lives today. We get information all day long. We
Yeah.
get information from all places, whether we trust it or not, and
Right.
everybody's willing to share. But what's the truth? Where does the truth lie? What is really going on? What's the real undercurrent? And picture just you're walking with this young child and you have no idea. You don't have a map. You have like a kind of a map, but it's not like you've got the streets and there's like no, this is what you're going to
No.
do and this is where you turn and this is going to be this big building that nobody told you about. Oh, and there's this farm over there. We don't know who those people are like, but go visit the cows for a while. I mean,
Right.
you have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. No
Every
idea.
morning you
And
get up like that.
every day for years, I know. And then you don't have, we're a fingerprint away of contacting everyone we know and love in this world, but
Yes.
to lose contact with all the people who are your strength, your people, your family, your best friends, like
Hmm.
how do you deal with that? I mean, that's a huge part of Lily's story. That was a huge part of my grandfather's story. When he left Europe, he lost complete touch with his family. Like that is torturous to me.
Yeah. Yeah, you just don't know what happened to your brother, what happened to, at any moment you're not being able to reach out and say what's going on. My cousin was also telling that my uncle knew how to type, and that was a huge
Okay.
skill in the war because nobody
Okay.
knew how to type. So they put him in
Yeah.
like, we've got to get these messages out, and they would have him do it because they said nobody else knows how to type. So it was
Wow.
weird the skills that would come up that you would
Hmm.
actually need. Also, I had no idea that there was an issue in Greece with Jews in Greece.
Hmm.
And I'll talk
I
about
know.
like completely. like, gobsmacked of this one. I'm like, wait, what is going on? So
Yeah.
these people, I had no idea the scope of the issues, even though it was all taught to us in school. It was these questions about battles. And I know you discovered your family's story at, 15, like, writing this paper about it. And it's so interesting because we were quizzed on what was the battle, what happened here, what happened there. But the real stories of go out and interview somebody who was from the Holocaust, or that would actually be a far better use of time of trying to discover a story in your family. Go back, talk to your grandparents, go talk to somebody who tells you a story. Instead of, we're always quizzed on what battle happened on what day and who won the battle. And
Right.
really, the progression of the war through Europe, for everything I've watched, I don't really know exactly how everything happened. My husband's
Right.
better at this, but I'm not.
Yeah.
He'll say, yeah, they're trying to
Yeah.
bomb that place and they can't get to it. And, that's what's going on. So,
Yeah, there is the whole military piece of a war, which people, it's like what you go straight to when you think of war or
yes,
military, but it's
yes.
the people who are left behind, who aren't on the battlefields. And I mean, it's all of it. But yeah, it's the women and children trying to fend for themselves, or the Jews in hiding, or I mean, Germans were plucking Catholics off the street too. You
Yeah.
weren't safe. And so yeah, how did you, I agree. I mean, I think that research paper in my junior year in high school changed my life. It changed everything. Gave me so much perspective. And I think, I know I'm asked to speak more and more often at schools right now, and that's I'm so inspired and so excited about that, because I think talking to kids in that high school range, in a way that, I mean, not only was I that age when I discovered this part of my history, but my family was around that age too. My family was either in their late teens, early 20s when they were going through this. And I think if you can either look back and talk to a relative and ask about what it was like, which sadly now we're getting to the
Young
point where
people.
that those fewer and fewer stories, but even just reading about one or watching a show or listening to a podcast in a way that kind of removes the historical lens, the sepia tones and the dust, and kind of makes it feel very relevant. And like we were talking about, like lets you step into the shoes and hearts and minds of these folks who are experiencing it firsthand. I think that's the way that history then becomes meaningful, right?
Hmm.
And when you can
Hmm.
relate to it, when you can empathize, it becomes meaningful. You can understand it in a better way. I mean, you can't wrap your head around 6 million lost in the
No.
Holocaust. That's not fathomable. But when you can tell the story through the lens of one human being, it humanizes it, and then it makes it kind of settle in your heart in a very different way.
I remember we had a geography book when I was in grammar school, and it was like Pedro wears like a poncho. Pedro eats this food. Pedro is from, and it was like, okay, I felt like I knew that country then because I knew what Pedro was
Yeah.
doing all day long, as opposed to here's a map of South America, and you figure out where the countries are in South America. Well, someday you just may be able to find that on a map, but you really want to know what happened in each of those little towns along the way. Who were the people?
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
you're going and speaking in high school, if they watch the show, and there was a show about the airmen, and I don't remember what the name of it was. If you watch those two pieces, one's about the war and one is about the people, and you watch this, there's a much broader experience of what was going on besides a battle here and a battle there. How
Yeah.
were the people actually feeling when all the planes went out and only one came back? Like what were the emotions like that people were feeling? Instead of just this number of Americans were killed during the war and this
Right.
was what was going on. And I don't know, I'm just think so much that that's what we want people to go out and feel, and that relationship of Esty and what she's trying to do, and would you have done it, and to just
Right.
quiz a group of high school kids, like if you had the opportunity, what would you do, and just
Yeah.
write a paper on what you would do, which character did you identify with, what would happen,
And
and
why?
it personalizes that story.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
I still think
Yeah.
especially, because we're sitting there, we're talking about this, and then we can talk about October 7th, which is much
Mhm.
more real and came across in television, the rise of anti-Semitism. And if you don't understand it, just watch what happened in that kibbutz that one afternoon and what happened to
Yeah.
the people that were there. And I think that while it is, it's so sad what's going on, to see that there's a parallel of hatred that is continuing, but to educate kids because it started back here and this is where we are
Yeah.
now. you know?
Yeah, the relevance today is scary. I mean, I never would have thought. I set out for my first interview to interview a relative for We Were the Lucky Ones in 2008. Like, if you'd ever told me then that when the book came out in 2017, the series last year, this new book this year, that the themes would feel so incredibly modern and relevant, I would have never believed you. Like, I couldn't have fathomed it, but yeah, here we are, and it feels like there's never been a more important time than to
Mhm.
share these stories, to keep them
Yes, I
alive,
agree.
and again, to tell them in a way that feels relevant. Yeah, I read a statistic in the from the ADL that about half of adults around the world hold anti-Semitic beliefs and deny the historical facts of the Holocaust, and that over half of young like people under 40 don't even know about the Holocaust. So when you combine that like lack of knowledge with the crazy rise in anti-Semitism, it's a scary time. It's a
It's a
really
very
scary
scary
time.
time. It's a very scary time, and it's you'll see it in our town. Like the temples have more security around them. What
Yeah,
everybody is doing, but it's
yeah,
this irrational things that are happening. It's not
yeah,
like during the war; it was progression of things, but we were at war, so you understood we're not at war right now, and
yeah.
we're still seeing the same cultural battles, being religious battles being fought. And for what point? Like, what is
Right,
the point? Like, what part of that religion that's also part of Christianity in a lot of ways do you not
right.
understand? Like,
Yeah,
it's
it's
just
very
another
confusing
view.
to
And
me.
when we were kids with Catholic kids make confirmation, Jewish children will go and have their bar mitzvah. I don't know what the other religions do, and usually the education stops about 13. And I
Hmm.
always said it would be really nice if the next year they studied the other religions. And I
That's such a good
remember
idea.
right after 9/11, Jane Friedman over at HarperCollins put together a minister, a rabbi, and someone from the Israeli, I'm sorry, the Iranian faith, and he put them all
Mm,
together in a room. And we sat and had the most amazing discussion about who
interesting.
was common in the Bible and what was the same. And we were there. No one wanted to leave
That's
because we were
amazing.
finally, right after 9/11, having this brilliant discussion about religion and what religion meant to us and growing up and things like that. And it's something that you, as an adult, once you've finished going through certain rituals, you don't do them again. You don't
Yeah,
really think about it quite the same way. You go to
I think it's
church or
so
you don't.
true.
You go to temple or you don't. You celebrate on Saturday, Friday or Saturday or Sunday or you don't. And but
Hmm.
it's not the same kind of thing of understanding why those people do what they do and what their commitment is.
Yeah, I think
Mm.
those sort of interfaith conversations are that incredible, and again, probably more important now than ever as well. I you don't hear about them happening that much
No, when we
now.
talk about Abraham, the person's common in the three. Let's talk about where that came from. How did that, come together? And I find that when you can have an intellectual conversation like that, it is
Mhm.
mind-blowing because
Isn't it?
everybody contributes in the room because everybody's going to share their own experience, whether they're practicing their faith now or not. I mean, I'm
Right.
definitely lapsed, but I remember every tradition. I've got every
Yeah.
tradition down. And my son was best friends with two children who were Jewish, so he went to more bar mitzvahs. I mean, he had his
Yeah.
little suit all ready to go. Saturday nights, Corey's out, da, da, da. And when he was back, when he made his confirmation, he goes, "Nobody's coming." And I said, "Well, we're not having that kind of a party.
Yeah.
We're not doing this stuff." He goes, "I think they should have to come to mine." And that's where I got the idea of he understood the doors of the Torah opening. He knew everything
Mm.
that was going on. And yet we don't have that same thing going the other way. And I just feel like studying religion when you're in school at some point is not a bad thing to do.
Yeah,
You know?
100%. Yeah, I'm
It's
with you.
like, because you don't, when you understand, it's a different thing. But I really had no idea about Greece. I mean, I don't know how this totally boggled my mind. And a lot of people were killed there and
Oh yeah.
never
I think
even thought about
the
it before.
percentage killed there was second only to Poland. Like it was massive. Yeah. It's
And
for a small country. I mean, it was devastating. Yeah.
And the loss is devastating, the death is devastating, but also the impact on everybody, like the impact on
Mhm.
Lily for the rest of her life, the impact
Mhm.
on Theo, who had no childhood. I mean, his childhood was like walking. And I was thinking about walking any place with a young child, which is some version of torture. Like just getting
Yes.
into like, the food store is like stopping and
Yeah.
picking up an acorn on the way and something like
Right.
that. And to get them committed to get to someplace before dark, you were illustrating of we can't fool around now, but here's your favorite thing, and you still have your favorite toy, and this is
Mhm.
still with you. And knowing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I thought so much. I have two little boys at home. They're 13 and almost 8 now, but I thought so much about them in their like toddler years and what that would have been like. I thought about it a lot with We Were the Lucky Ones and Felicia too, who was a
Mhm.
1-year-old at the start of the war. Because it's
Yeah.
just again, it's really hard to imagine how you would parent in times like that and how your children would react. And from everything Felicia told me, it was she's just like, I knew from the youngest age, and she had the earliest memories, her memories from when she was tiny. And I think things were just different then. But at the same time, I also in One Good Thing really allowed because Lily is out on the road, literally walking or biking or on the back of a truck or just moving constantly with Theo, allowed her to have moments where they told a story or
Mhm.
looked for ants or kicked a ball, just to try to preserve a little bit of that normalcy because I imagine that's what I would have tried to do is preserve those little moments that gave him a glimpse of a childhood.
Mhm.
And so I tried to weave those throughout, kind of based on my own experiences with my kids and how I might entertain them on a long walk. I don't know.
Mine are 30 and 35, both boys. So I was doing the same thing. I was trying
Oh,
to figure
yeah.
like how we would do this, like who would
Yeah.
be off the trail, who would, and it was great. It was
Right.
just one because two would have
Yes.
been, we're going to sit down and
Yeah.
play with this tree for a while, you know? So
Totally. Yeah.
completely different experience, you know? And were there personal threads woven into this book the same way that, I mean, you can't get away from your family. I mean, the family
Yeah.
stories are like there. Are some of these characters really based on people you knew?
Yeah, I didn't necessarily know going into it. I was honestly very nervous to write the second one because again, the first one was such a passion project and was just deeply ingrained in my ancestry. And so I ended up sort of inadvertently leaning on people who I know and love to bring my characters to life. So or like the friendship between Lily and Esty is, inspired by the bond that I share with my closest friends and
Mhm.
those people who you would do anything for and they would do anything for you. Lily has a very close relationship with her father. I was very close with my father, and her mother. Her mother has passed, but I kind of purposely took her mother out of the equation so that Lily really felt like she needed to draw upon, again, her own strength, her own inner strength to try to get through some of these impossible challenges. My boys were absolutely an inspiration for Theo. That was kind of a lot of fun in a way to write. There's a young American soldier who's very much inspired by my father, and a little bit by my husband, who are two of the um, kindest, most big-hearted sort of Southern gentlemen that I know. So yeah, I really did. Esty is a lot of, if you've read We Were the Lucky Ones or watched the series, Helena is the youngest sibling in my grandfather's family of the five, and she sort of has the biggest, boldest personality,
Mhm. Mhm.
never takes no for an answer and is defiant to a fault. So that was a lot of Esty.
Mhm.
Her inspiration. And then for Lily, I did draw from my own perspectives and my
Mhm.
mom's. She and I are very much alike. And there was another character in the series and obviously in the book too, named Bella. She was Jacob and Bella. It was the youngest brother and his wife Bella, who in real life is Marilla. In the book and in the series, she goes by Bella. And the young woman who played Bella, Eva Filer, I fell in love with the whole cast, but I fell in love with Eva for who she is as a human being. She's one of the just most beautiful souls you'll ever meet. Um, Kind of quiet, very smart, funny and also in a quiet sort of way. Um, Empathetic, just wonderful to be around. And so the way she was as a human and also the way that she brought Bella to life on the screen
Mhm.
was so much of Lily. Like I just started seeing because it was interesting. I got to do the two projects in parallel. The series got picked up partway through writing of the book. So I was able to, draw from my experience being part of the writer's room, helping to edit scripts and then being on set and watching those scripts come to life, literally watching my family history come to life on the screen. It was amazing.
Mhm.
And seeing how a television show is made, and our writers were just so brilliant. So I I really had that in my head as I was writing and polishing and editing the final drafts of One Good Thing. And yeah, Eva was very much an inspiration for Lily. And fun fact, Eva is our narrator for the One Good Thing audio edition. So if any of you are listeners and you want to listen, she's British. She has the most gorgeous accent. She is a phenomenal narrator. But I kind of raised my hand as soon as we were looking for people to fill that role with Penguin, my publisher. I said, can we please give this to Eva because she'll do it justice and then some, and she really did. It's beautiful.
Oh, that's so nice. I listened this morning. I listened to
Oh, you
clips this
did?
morning. Yes, I was listening to part this morning because
Oh,
I said I just want to get a handle on because I'd read the print book, but I said I just want to get a handle. You know what's interesting is usually when I read that I know I'm going to want to do an interview, I fold down pages, the things I
okay.
want to think about, and I have no folded down pages, which just
Oh,
showed I was just reading the story. I was
oh, you're
just
just
going
in
through.
it.
It's not like
Yeah.
I said I have to grasp this because I remembered. I
Wow.
remembered when this part came in or that part came in. And I think it's the storytelling that you did and also knowing your way of storytelling. It's like,
Hmm.
the way you told the story in One Good Thing was very much like We Were the Lucky Ones. It's just the
Hmm.
story of these people and you're immersed and you don't stop. You don't stop because they're not stopping. They're constantly, and they're
Yeah.
not stopping till the end. And the end, they may be who they were before or they've changed, but you've been with them all along the way. But I was noting, like, in my brain, like, what would we like walking with a young child? What do we like seeing a cow on the side of the road? All these
Mhm.
things that not part of my life, but what
Yeah.
it must have been like for this woman trying to save this child. And I think besides worrying about herself, it probably the best thing for Lily was she had somebody else to worry about because just
Hmm.
worrying about her was she would sacrifice herself. She would not
Yeah.
do, and the relationship with her
Yeah.
father, I just thought was like, just wonderful. It's, he's
Yeah.
he's now a single guy and where he is, and there's a brilliant moment that happens later in the book that is just super special for storytelling of what family meant at that time and what it
Mm-hmm.
meant to be. But
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah, I loved writing his. I wrote love their relationship was really special. I loved writing that. And I'll tell you a funny anecdote just about you're mentioning she has somebody else to kind of worry about and
Right.
to pour her energy into. And so early on, when I was kind of hashing out the plot of the book in my mind, and I was sitting with my husband Robert, um, and one night, like the kids had gone to bed, and we were just in the living room talking, and I was, saying it out loud for the first time, and and she's my main character is going to be this young woman, and she's going to have to set off on her own, and she's going to be in bombed out cities and Nazi occupied territory, but she's got her best friend's son with her, but she's just got to keep him safe. And meanwhile, she's lost track of everybody, and she's so much uncertainty. She doesn't know where her dad is. She doesn't know if she's going to see her best friend again. But she's got Theo, and he's this one good thing in her life, and she keeps going. And Robert stopped me and he said, "One good thing, that would be a good title." And I said, "You know what? You're right." So
Like,
I
I was going to
credit him
ask
for
you,
the
where did the
title.
title come from? And it's like, yeah, one
Yeah.
good thing. That makes total sense. Total
Yeah,
sense.
there's a passage in the book too where she kind of
Yeah.
reflects on that. So yeah, I was like, thank you, because titles are hard.
Titles are hard. Like, just to know, like, what we're going to do. And that was one of my questions is what before, and also talk to us about Gino Bartali, who pops up in the
Uh,
book. I just love this. I didn't know he was cycling champion, but like
yeah,
coming to him on the road, and it meant so much to her father and
yeah,
what he was doing that
yeah.
I might not think about.
He's an example of one of many people I stumbled across in my research. So I just thought, wow, what a character. Like he needs to make a cameo in my story. So Gino Bartali was Italy's golden boy cyclist. He won the Tour de France. He won all the big races in Italy just before the war. So everybody knew his face. He was all over every poster. And I discovered that there was a network of priests and civilians working all across Italy, especially in the north where it was occupied to help protect the Jews. And a lot of times that meant providing them with false identification papers to claim that they were Aryan. Because if you were Jewish, you had to report, there was a census, you had to bring in your passport, your paperwork, and it was stamped with a giant red stamp that said of the Hebrew race. So, your paperwork would give you away immediately if you were to show your real papers. So there was this big network, and Lily eventually finds herself in one of the towns where this network is prevalent. It's called Assisi. It's in Umbria. It's a beautiful little village. If you ever have a chance to go, you have to. It's unbelievably picturesque, and it was wild being there, just looking at the most beautiful little tiny, these narrow streets and this white rock village kind of clinging to the side of a mountain, and olive tree orchards and farmland in the distance, and just knowing that amidst this completely idyllic scene, there was this whole underground network of people preserving the lives of 300 Jews who lived in this tiny village. Anyway, so there was a printer in this village who was secretly printing IDs in the back of his shop. His name was Luigi Breezy, real man. Didn't tell anybody, not even his family, about this job he was doing on the side. He was working with one of the monks at the local monastery, Father Nicacci, also a real person. And they were shuttling papers between Assisi and Florence to an archbishop in Florence who was helping, named Dalla Costa. And it turns out one of the ways that they were shuttling these IDs was via Gino Bartali, and who would tuck them and hide them away in the frame of his racing bike because he knew no one would think to stop him. So Lily sort of makes this discovery over time, but she bumps into him twice, and on the second visit, she realizes that he's the guy, he's the courier, and there have been books written about him. He was honored, I think, after he died, for his effort in helping to save. So I think they counted like 500 or 600 lives that he saved just by shuttling those papers around Italy.
And I love that Esty was so good at putting them together. Like she could take a great
Yes.
picture, and she was great at just taking something and making like, oh, here's your new ID. This is what it's going to be. But she did such a good job of it. I got a
Mm-hmm.
question. Have you ever read Mark Sullivan's book, Beneath the Scarlet Sky? Have you read
Yes, I
that?
read it like right when it came out. So it's been a while, but that's one of the books that stands out to me as a beautiful depiction of what was happening in Italy at the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that your two books, like read, like if you're in a book group, to read both of them as
Mhm.
companions, I think would be really
Mhm.
interesting because you've got one story and he's got the story of the real life Pianowello. And I
Yeah.
remember Mark coming up to me, I think it was 2013, and he said to me, I'm on my way to Italy. If I can write this guy's story, I think I'm going to have a massive bestseller. I think that this
Ah,
guy's, if this man will let me tell his story, and I think Pino's still alive, which is
oh, it's
like
amazing.
93, I think, at the time. And
Yeah.
Mark was saying, like, I'm just going to go do this and let's see what happens. And I just found it was so interesting to read the two books. And, Pino's carrying people over the mountains. Switzerland was the golden place to be. Like, Switzerland was
Right.
what you wanted to get to. And
Right.
what was happening, even with Lily's father, of like, you've got to get to Switzerland. This is like the really good place to be. I don't know. It's like, when you sat down to write, did you have the whole story in your head? Did you know what you were going to do?
I had the gist of it. I didn't know how it would end. So I knew it would, take place largely during the war years and a little bit after. And I wanted it, I wanted to cover ground. I wanted to like the scope of it to be broad so that you would understand kind of what was happening throughout Italy, not just in like one little town. But I didn't know how the story would end, and I won't give anything away here, but I almost surprised myself in the decision that I made. So yeah, it was very different for We Were the Lucky Ones. I spent years um, unearthing the family story. So how I'm trying to understand, again, my grandfather was one of five siblings. So how each of those siblings and their spouses and sometimes their children were able to survive, where they went, how they got from A to B to C in order to finally reunite in Brazil. Like, how did that all happen? And it took me forever, but I figured it out. And then I kind of had to go back and do the historical piece, then say, okay, well, what was happening in all these places where they found themselves? Not just Poland, of course, but Africa and Brazil and Siberia, all the places that they landed, because their paths really, they scattered across continents, right?
Right.
But for one good thing, I started with the historical research and really got immersed in what was happening in Italy. And that's when I started noting all the inspiring events that happened, the horrific events that happened, the surprises. I was so surprised to find many camps that were erected in Italy that were shipping, both Nazis and Italian police were pulling Jews from their homes, putting them in these camps, and then shipping them to Auschwitz. I just never knew that there were
Mhm.
camps within Italy. So
Right.
all the things, the good and the bad. And I started there. And then I took that and then I tried to map Lily's journey kind of in a way that allowed me to weave some of the most interesting and impactful findings throughout.
Yeah, and I love the map in the front, which I
Mm.
honestly didn't really look at till the end, but I love that there was
Yeah.
a map in the front. And I was like,
Yeah. Shows how much ground she covers.
so much
Yeah.
ground she covered. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And and you're getting to a town and you don't know what that one's going to be. You don't know. Look, if I ever went to towns around here and if it's that much further, even in New Jersey, how do I know what the people are? How do I know
Yeah.
what it is? What
Or if
it's.
someone tells you, because oftentimes she'll have somebody say, okay, this town is safe and this one is not. You want to avoid the checkpoints here. You want to go cross the river here rather than going through the train station there, whatever. But then things can change overnight. The Nazis can leave one village and come into another. And that actually happens to her in a place called Todi, where she thinks it's safe and it's not safe. So,
And don't get on the train because the train is going to check you. So don't get on the train. So keep walking. You just have to keep walking. And it's.
yeah. And watch the skies for bombers because you never know when one's going to fly overhead.
Yeah, yeah. It's so you're like in each different way, you're sitting and worry. It's a constant worry. It's a constant
Yeah.
worry. And you wonder what happens later in life, like with your family. It's interesting to sit down after having been through that. Do you
Hmm.
relax? How do you
Yeah.
find everyday life again? And how long
Right.
does it take? Because so many people came back from World War II with soldiers with PTSD. They came back from
Yeah.
Vietnam the same way. And all this, what ends up happening? Like, where does your normalcy begin? And a lot of people, it came that they didn't talk about the war. They just came
Yeah.
back and it was, I'm not going to say a word. It was bad. And that's all they
Yeah.
said. And as a result, there wasn't that learning that we could get from a family member or whatever because they just chose
Yeah.
not to speak about it.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to me that there is, uh, at least for me, what I noticed with that third generation survivors, so my generation, um, have had maybe more because we're not as close to the stories. So those grandparents who didn't talk about them, probably as a way to preserve their own sanity, to protect themselves, but also to protect their children. Look, my mom's sister was born at the tail end of the war. My mom's was born just after the war. Like everything was still so new and raw. The
Hmm.
the I can imagine not talking about it was a way to protect the children of the next generation, to not
Hmm.
traumatize them. In the same way that if people who chose to talk about it, that was a very conscientious decision too. But I think it's so interesting how third gen has been asking those questions, perhaps because we have the distance, and maybe because the first generation also has that distance, they're more willing to talk about it. So there are a
Hmm.
lot of books and films and podcasts and shows written by third generation producers and authors, and I find that very interesting.
Yeah, and it's also how few people have to tell their stories. There was a
Yeah.
piece on Sunday, CBS Sunday Morning that I actually linked to in our newsletter a couple of weeks ago because one of our readers was in it, and
Oh,
she's the
cool.
head of the Holocaust Museum down in Miami. And
Okay.
I actually connected Kristen Hanna to her right after I read The Nightingale, like right after I read
Okay.
manuscripts to say, I think you two should know each other. I think you could do something
Yeah.
together. And to sit there and she says, like, I got out. And the publisher that I worked with when I was at Mademoiselle, the last publisher, Julie said, yes, we evacuated a coal car. Like that's how we, got out of town and this is what we did. And to hear the stories, but you don't really get in depth. And I'd love to sit down and talk to Julie now after having read both your books and say, okay, now
Mhm.
tell me the story. Tell me like,
Yeah.
what ended up happening. Because you don't
Yeah.
want the story to be lost. You're right. You want to make sure that people continue to, to have the conversations. So, okay, so your editor at one point when you finished, we were the lucky ones, I'm sure turned to you and say, so what's next?
Yes.
That moment when you said, oh, I have to do something next.
Yes.
Next, I did something. I thought it was really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, yeah. No, that she did exactly ask me that question, and I was very taken aback because again, I went into the first one as the granddaughter, the family historian. I hadn't yet thought of myself as an author,
Yeah.
even after the book had come out. It was just this thing that came together, and it was an incredible experience and the support of the family and learning about my ancestry. So I think it just was a very unique experience. And so then when she said, what's next? I really did have to pause and think long and hard about where I wanted to spend my time. Yeah.
Yeah, where do I want to spend my time? Where do I want to spend my time
My
telling the story
headspace, my
again?
heart space. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a,
yeah.
yeah,
How long
you put so much into it.
how long did taking this like writing the second book take? How long
Second
did
one
it
was about 5 years, but COVID was in the middle of that, and the
film?
adaptation was in the middle
Adaptation.
of that. So there were many kind of stops and starts. And the editing process was more challenging in this one because I was, in the first book, I wasn't going to change characters or plot. I wasn't going to change anything that was true. I could obviously hone the prose. I could work on my character development, setting details, all of that. But I wasn't going to take out two relatives to make it a simpler story. Like,
Hmm.
sorry, readers, it's a lot to keep track of, but that's the story.
Right.
And for this one, so my first drafts were very, very, very different in one good thing from what you read today. And because I was open to that, I was open to, okay, well, what if we shifted here? What if we started a little bit later in the war? And so all of a sudden 30 chapters turned into 10,
Hmm.
in the
Hmm.
beginning.
Yeah.
So that was a very different piece of the experience for me too. And I'm so lucky. I have an incredible team that I work with between my agent, Brettany Bloom, my editor, Pam Dorman, and the team at Penguin. We all work very closely and very well together. So the feedback that I get is always really good.
Yeah, and this is it. Like you read the notes and you go, okay, I'm not going to die. It's okay. I just
Yeah,
have to
you
keep
read
going.
yeah. I mean, you definitely trust me. Like the day you get notes, I remember my agent being like, read them, put them in the drawer, and forget about them, and then come back to them tomorrow.
Right, right, right. Do
Notes are
not
always,
react.
yeah.
Do not
Do not
react.
react. Do not call me. Do not like just process it for a day. And it's so true because it always starts with the good, and then you're like, and then they're like, and here are 4 pages of things we think you could do differently, and you have to process that. And you have to think, okay. But I think I've also learned as a writer, now that I officially consider myself an author, that notes are wonderful. And if you have a trusted team, they're going to make your book a better book, 100%. But they're also a representation of what bumps a reader and a really good reader, an editor out of a story. So you must take heed and take note of those, of that feedback. If something bumps you out of a story, that's not good, right?
Right.
There will always be a suggestion with that note of what to do. So, okay, this bumped me, try this. What I've learned is oftentimes that's a great suggestion. Or what I do is I take the bump and I think, well, how would I fix it? What feels really right to me
Right.
and how I would address that. And trusting my own intuition there has been really helpful was really helpful with this book.
Yeah, just sit there and say, okay, this is a problem, but okay, there's one solution, but how would I fix it?
How
What's
would,
my
yeah, there are
solution?
lots of different ways to solve that problem. Totally.
Yeah, but there's a problem and you got to do something,
Yeah.
Who sees your work first when you finish?
My mom.
Okay. And before it
My
goes to
mom has
anybody.
been my number one wing woman and editor from the very beginning of We Were the Lucky Ones. So, my mom and my husband.
Mhm.
My husband came with me on all of my research travels for We Were the Lucky Ones. My mother traveled with me through Italy, which was wonderful
It's
because
been
we
so much
were
fun. Oh my gosh.
walking in her old footsteps too, right? So yeah, it was incredible. We spent a week together in this little rented Fiat and drove the length of Italy and stopped at all the places where Lily stops and all the places where real people, lived and breathed. And it was amazing. We actually spread some of my father's ashes when we were in Rome. Like it
Mhm.
was a really special trip.
Yeah.
So they're my two. And then I've had a dear friend named John Sherman, who's I went to University of Virginia with, who's also a writer among many other things. So he's read, those were my three first readers, my mom, my husband, and my friend John.
And they do notes and then
They give
you
me amazing notes and lots of, most of all, confidence.
yes.
They boost my
It is a
confidence.
book. It is a book. It's going to be okay. It will be published and it's going to
Yeah.
be all right,
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then it goes to my agent, Brettany, who I also adore and
Yeah.
trust. And then eventually, when it's polished enough, it will go to my editor.
And they still come back with 9 pages of notes.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, the editing process is years. It's
Yes.
years. It's amazing how tedious it is.
I think that most people don't realize is the writing, the editing, the book comes out, and the talking about the book is a lot longer period than. And then if they start to talk to you about two books before, one of my friends goes, "I need to reread it because I don't even remember
Totally.
what."
I know people
That
do ask me very detailed questions about one good thing. I'm like, that was 2008 when I was researching it, but yeah, or about We Were the Lucky Ones. Yeah.
I think that's what happened. I think that's what happened. Was this always the cover? Was this always the
Yes,
cover?
that was the first cover I saw and I fell in love with it. She looks so much like my real grandmother, my real life grandmother, Caroline, who you meet in We Were the Lucky Ones.
Yeah.
And it's kind of grainy. It's got so much emotion to it. I just love it. I love it. Yeah. I
And
love the
I was
colors.
constantly trying to figure out who he was, who he was,
Yeah. I mean, he looks like a soldier. I think it's a little bit ambiguous on purpose.
Yes, it is.
But
It is because I didn't know, where he was, and I do find out later. So,
yeah, yeah.
oh my God. So now, are you working on something new?
I've got so many ideas for new projects. Nothing that I've, pitched to Penguin yet, but I'm also working on the school stuff with We Were the Lucky Ones. I'm
Mhm.
creating a curriculum around the book. Now that I've got so much research, right, that I did, primary sources. I've got audio interviews, I've got show interviews, I've got all the research I did for the book, which then when we made the series, we kind of like tripled down on. So I have a research tribe that is incredibly resourceful. I have, my book. So I have like how I turned maybe an interview with a family member into a passage in the book.
Mhm.
I have the script that came out of the writer's room, so months and months of adaptation process. And then I have the series. So I just feel like there's a way to weave these different kind of mediums, these different forms of storytelling
Mhm.
together to reach younger, again, kids in high school, middle school, college that are maybe learn in different ways, like there's all these different entry points
Right.
into this story that's a very big story. It's, one family story that represents this hugely important moment in history. So I'm really trying to spend some time figuring out how to I have all of this at my fingertips and I want to be able to present it to this younger audience in a way that feels again relevant. I've had so much fun at schools. I'll have them read an interview, a notes from an interview, or
Mhm.
listen to an audio clip from one of my interviews, and then I'll have them read a passage from the book, and then I'll have another group get up and read from the script. And I mean, it's really if the kids are into it, which so far they have been, and then we'll watch that clip from the series. And so I just think it's really neat for them to see and get young actors bringing the story to life, contemporary actors that they grew up watching, like Logan Lerman, Joey King. These are like people who they've watched since they were kids,
Right.
little kids. So yeah,
I think
so that's a big focus.
it sounds fabulous for you to do it at school, but I'd love to see it on like a bigger thing. So if you're not there, what the people
Yeah,
could do. Like,
yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to do. Create package
mhm.
it in a way. I don't want it to sound like markety or salesy. It's nothing to do with that. It's just like putting it together in a way that's accessible. And maybe it's on a website or maybe it's some kind of special curriculum with all these different types of mediums that you can plug in if it feels right. Yeah, so I'm in the early stages of that.
Yeah, it's almost like, like on your website, it's like, what would you want for a
Mm,
teacher? What would you be interested in it? And it's actually, this is going to sound really nuts, but there's the National Council of Teachers of English Conference every November,
oh,
and it's
cool.
held someplace different all the time. And to just go and meet people that are, this
Yes.
is what they're
No,
teaching and
teachers are
talk to
my
them about
best.
how it, and I know it would delay a project or whatever, but you can find the seminal people to talk to about this. We used to have a kids
Yeah.
and teens site. I did away with them a couple of years ago, but because it was just like there was a lot going on during
Mhm.
COVID. And it was really interesting though, because I went to those things and you'd sit there and say, what books are you going to be reading in the schools? What's going on?
Mhm.
And now with like bands going on and things like that, I always like work
Yes,
around. I always work, okay, that's happening. Let's go around that and figure out what
that's
we're
a
going
great
to do next.
idea.
But it's
Yeah,
just
I'll
interesting
follow
to
up with
see.
you on
I
that.
think you're a a multimedia curriculum, I think right now would work so well with kids as well because they're interested in how a show gets written. I mean, I've
Hmm.
always said that I think one of the most interesting things, they did it for Laura Dave's show, the first one that she did. And we went and we watched it, and then they were talking about it, and the producers were there. And for everybody to
Hmm.
hear what a showrunner does and what this does, I was
Yeah,
at a festival a couple of years ago, and one of the authors was ill and couldn't make it. And I sat there and I said to the author, so you were a showrunner. Do you want to sit there and tell them what that's like? Or do you guys want to do questions from the audience? And immediately Megan Abbott jumped on and talked about how they did a show about
that's cool.
cheerleading where they could only be on the field for 2 days. So
That's
it was,
amazing.
it's these
Yeah.
things that people don't know that are happening on the scenes. And as we're watching more, I think people are interested more in
Yeah.
how did you make it all come together? So
Yeah, and I think, being the granddaughter who then wrote the book that was, the inspiration for the show, I think it adds a credibility to it. So it
yes.
wasn't just like this fictionalized thing that I came up with. It was like such a
Mm-mm.
deep, and I think the ancestry piece is something we can all relate to, kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation. If the best feedback I get is yours. Is this somebody who tells me you inspired me to sit down with my aunt or my uncle or my grandmother and ask some questions. That's the
Right.
best feedback I could
Right.
ever get.
My cousin, I'm sure, was trying to figure out why I called him today. So I was like, and I burst right in. I said, look, I'm going to do this interview in like a half an hour. I just need this story. Just tell me what's going
Yeah.
on. And he was like,
Oh, I love
okay,
that.
Carol, like mid-sentence, haven't seen you in a couple of years. Let's just go mid-sentence and we'll start from there.
I
So
love that.
been such a pleasure talking to you today. I wish you so much luck with what's going on and keep me abreast. Like, shoot me a note and just let me know, what happens if you do, because I'd want to write something about that on our website on Book Reporter and just say this is something that's being offered because I'm out for people to know about things, especially after October 7th. I want people
Yeah.
to sit there and really do some hard thinking about what's going on. And I mean, kids, I don't know
Yes.
whether care where their parents are. It's
Yeah.
them do that same kind of critical thinking. So.
Yeah, I am like that's whenever I get invited to a school, it's the best
Yeah.
possible thing. So yeah, I will follow up with you. And there is a curriculum. It just I need to figure out how to get it out. And you're right, the best way to do that is to talk to teachers. So
Yeah.
if you ever talk to a teacher who's interested, put them in touch with me and I will have those conversations. And I want to get feedback from students too, my younger readers and watchers.
And
So
I
that's
know
gonna
the
be
director of
fun.
curriculum at our high school, and I'm going to reach out to
Yeah.
her and just
Yeah.
say, like, is this something, because we've been in touch before about like, let's get the books off the list that are the things they're never going to read. Like,
Yeah.
I remember
Right.
we always used to go on vacation right before school started in the fall. And Corey and his friend were very big readers, like a book a day readers. But the
Amazing.
high school reading list was a killer. Like they stopped reading in high school because of required reading, right?
Right,
So we'd
right.
be on vacation and they'd have like the 5 books to read. I remember Corey saying, well, Josh said I only need to read the first page and then the last page of this one because it's a book of essays and then he just talks for the rest of the chapter. So hearing their interpretation, and on the way home, they're going, Mom, is there any way we could be renting a book about like, the whale book, like the one that, Moby Dick? And he says, because we're never going to get through this one. And it was just, and I remember Ray Bradbury saying like, he hadn't really wanted to sit there and figure out like what was going to happen when he was making the movie. And it was just these
Right.
moments that were great. So,
Yes.
but they turned him off on reading. So I want to sit there and
Yeah.
figure out a way to keep them engaged because it's a way, especially boys. Boys are tough to keep on
Hmm.
reading because you can't find stuff that really delights them. And you
Hmm.
went from a kid who read every day to I don't think he's read a book in a year, and it's
Wow. Yeah, that's sad.
we're all the trying, but that's the way it is right now. So
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
program is a great idea. Your book is fabulous. And thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for joining us today.
Oh my gosh, this was such a fun conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot. And to everybody else, we'll see you next time on Book Reporter Talks to. There you go. That was so much fun. I really,
Yay. Yeah, thank
um,
you. That went by so fast.
they're going to send you an invitation for the Morristown Festival of Books in October.
I got the invitation. I literally just forwarded it to my husband to be like, "Can we pull this out? Because we're supposed to be traveling." So I'm gonna see. Fingers crossed.
There's
I'm in New Jersey for another festival though. When is
You're
that?
coming to Montclair who has not announced their schedule, just so you know.
Okay. Yeah.
And they sent me people that they want to meet because I said I'm very involved with Morristown. I'm involved in the
Okay.
scheduling.
I did
I
that
was
one for We Were the Lucky Ones. Were you involved then? I was probably
no,
like 2017.
I
Okay.
probably was, but more in like the background. But what
Okay.
I really love to do is pair you up with Sharon Kurtzman, who has written the book that Sharon Kurtzman's book is coming out in August. It's also from Pamela Dorman, and it's about this family in Austria
Oh, is this
after
the
the war.
Bakers, Vienna, the
Yes.
Baker, Lost Bakers of Vienna? Yes. Yes.
Fantastic. It's really
Yes.
good. And I think the
Yeah.
two of you together would be really great. And I said
Yeah,
to,
that would be
so
cool.
Sharon said she's in. She lives down in Virginia. And I said,
Oh,
let's
nice.
see if Georgia could do it because the two of you, because you're both talking about it and there's
That's
family
based on her
involved and
family
whatever
history.
from her
Yeah.
family, but she's not
Yeah.
really their story, but it's a really good book. And I'm picky. I mean, I'm notorious because I'll say, no, that's not going to work. And if I put
You
pairings
read a lot
together,
of books. Yeah. Yeah.
like I was like, when they said you want to interview people, literally they sent me from Montclair, like 12 people I don't know, like 12 or
Oh, wow.
15. And I'm like, whoa, let's go for the big, like let's go for really big authors. So I'm
Right.
going to try and come on the 26th, but they have not even
Okay.
announced their schedule as of
Yes.
Friday. And it's now like who the lineup is. I only knew yours
Right.
because I looked on your page. I looked on your tour page.
Yeah, I think they have me at a specific day and
Your
I don't know
April
about time.
26th,
But
April
yeah.
26th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well maybe I'll meet you in person there
I'm going to
then.
try and do that. I'm going to try and come down
Great.
there because my husband's going to be away on a golf trip. So I have free
Okay.
time, you know.
Do they ever do those like as interviews or is it mostly authors just standing up at a podium?
I
Do you
don't
know?
know. I've never been to
Yeah.
Montclair. And
Okay.
when we do Morristown, I've sort of been helping to wreck them over the last couple of years. And I said it's better with two people, one moderator who actually really knows the work. Go for it that
Right.
way. Don't do
Yeah.
3, don't do 4. And
Yeah.
make sure the moderators have got to be as good as the authors.
Well, I was
Either
gonna
that,
say you should moderate.
I moderate. Yeah, I would do it. I
Yeah.
absolutely would do it
Yeah.
because I know
I
both
mean,
books and I know how I
yeah.
would do it. But I've been advising them, like, as I see books I like this year, I'm sending them going, do this one, try to get this, try to get that, see if this will work.
Great.
And
Yeah.
we're trying to weave together so that it's first of all, the audience is great. It's a lot of like we fill churches. The things are held in churches or
That's
on
what
the
I
altar.
remember from we're talking about
Morristown.
the Morristown one. I remember speaking at a church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're sitting on a
Yeah.
church on the
Yeah.
altar,
Yeah.
where I think I left my watch last year on the table.
Uh,
But it's I can't find the watch anyplace. So I sat there and I was like, this is let's get like really quality people, and the audience is amazing. And I've also been after book festivals, and you just think about this as well. You go for your book sales at the festival, like how many did I sell there? But
mm,
beyond that, what did your number move on Amazon or whatever? Because I keep getting after book festivals. You don't sell the ebook and you don't sell the audio. And when you know
mhm,
what the audio sales are, it used to be like your rights to Finland. Now it actually matters. It's like one
mhm.
third sometimes.
Yeah.
What are we doing to sell an audiobook that day that the place is getting credit for it? Because you may sell X number of books, but how much else was bought that? And I've sat there and watched people buy on Amazon because they don't want to walk to the book tent. They don't need to
Right.
meet the author.
Right. They don't
I
need
want
the
to do
book
that. I want
signed
to
or
go to the
whatever.
next
Yeah.
event.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hope fingers crossed I'll be able to be in Morristown, and if not, I'll see you in April.
We'll send your husband a present. We'll send your
Yeah.
husband a present. And if not, I'm gonna try and meet you up with you in Montclair. I hope they announce that
Yes.
soon so
Yeah.
that I put the date away and I told a couple of my friends, I said, let's all go. So
Yeah,
we'll
good.
look awesome.
Great. Oh, it'll be
Okay, that'd be
nice.
fabulous. And really the curriculum on Carol at bookreporter.com.
Okay.
Feel free. And I'll see if I can find somebody that are teachers that were really, I'm gonna definitely turn to the woman over our high school. And she's the
Yeah,
director
I
of
mean
curriculum.
it just takes like the right person because like I don't know how it got into the hands of Beverly Hills High. They assigned it as mandatory summer reading for their AP English kids. So ninth and 10th graders, I think.
Right.
And it was amazing. So they had all read the book, and I came in September and I did a community presentation, but then I went into their classrooms and did individual stuff with them in their
Mhm.
classrooms, and it was amazing. It was
It's that
amazing.
way of giving more than the book. It's you
Yeah,
wrote the book, but it's the way of making the
totally.
book bigger. And
Totally.
I will
Yeah.
reach out because she's somebody, she just always run things by me, and I believe she's still there. My sons are like way out of high school, way out of high school,
Yeah, yeah.
but to keep the
Yeah.
connection going. So
Awesome. Thank
hopefully
you.
meet you, Montclair, and hopefully work with you in the fall. Okay.
I know. Sounds good. Have a good one, Carol. Nice
Thanks so
meeting
much.
you.
You too now. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.